member of Friends of Restorative Justice of Washtenaw County, and she has a JD from Wayne State University. Go Tartars. Kathy Friedrichs is a member of the Ann Arbor Area League of Women Voters. Kathy is a trained mediator and circle keeper through the Dispute Resolution Center. She's also an active member of the Friends of Restorative Justice of Washtenaw County. In addition, Kathy's an active member of Challenging Racism, one of the social justice groups at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor. And how many people attend the Unitarian Church? A lot of our friends are here today. Okay, good. Anyway, I will tell you from my personal experience of Kathy and Carolyn as a member at the Unitarian Church, these are two of the most active women in a we have about 400 member congregation. They're some of the most active members, Social Justice Council, more like 700, yeah. Anyway, a lot of people, and they are two of the absolute leaders in social justice. So please help me welcome Carolyn Madden and Kathy Friedrichs.
Just let me know when you want me to move the slide.
Okay, so you heard we're both from Everything Together. We decided when we would retire. We're friends for over 30 years, and we said, what are we going to do when we retired? And we both knew we were going to do things together. So here we are. So we're here today. You heard about Restorative Justice. Let me just tell you that Friends of Restorative Justice is an organization that has over 150 to 200 people on our mailing list. We meet every month, and we have over 20 to 30 people on our steering committee, sometimes too many. Quickly, our main goal is to change the system, the criminal justice system in Washtenaw County, from a punitive one to a restorative and healing system. Because in the process, we'd like to reduce mass incarceration as well. So what happened is over the 5 years we've been working on these, and we've been working to try to get things, different kind of processes that we could use instead of the punitive system. And Kathy will talk a little bit more later, but one of the things is victim offender conferencing. And in the process of getting there, we came across some stumbling blocks. And the stumbling blocks are, there's a lot of them. Actually, you were just asking one of the stumbling blocks. The court system, the legislation, and the prosecutor's office is a stumbling block. So we've investigated the prosecutor, and what we found, and it's apropos of being here, one of the most important things is to realize that we can change that by our vote, if you so choose. We can vote for the prosecutor. So we'll repeat that over and over again as we go through this. Okay, so yeah. So today what we hope is that you'll learn the impact prosecutors have in the criminal justice system, and you'll learn how your vote can help reform justice. And we're going to discuss some of your experiences and suggestions about prosecutor performance. Help develop people's standards of prosecutor. Just so you know, when we started this, we got involved with the ACLU. ACLU has a Smart Justice Project, and one of the focuses there was also on the prosecutor culture. And so we've worked with them. What they would like is when we do these presentations that we get your feedback to help develop a people's standards for prosecutors. I'm not sure we're going to get to that today. It takes a little bit more thinking and going through that to come up with real standards that we want. But we are going to get with some of your questions and maybe some of the questions that you would like to ask prosecutors, and we will give that to ACLU as some feedback for that. And so we hope that we will all help shape the kind of prosecutor's office you want for Washtenaw County. So first, a few statistics, just to put it in perspective. So this is just showing you the crime trends for the past, 60 years. And so you could see that crime rose, and then it came down, and it's still coming down. So, this is the Michigan compared to the U.S. The first one was just U.S., and that was violent crimes and property crimes. Doesn't look at all crimes. But so you can see that Michigan sort of looks like the rest of the nation as well. Next slide, yeah. At the same time, incarceration rates have gone up. So a lot of times when we present this, people say, how could that be? You know, crime is down. How do you know crime is down? And that's one of the questions, next one, that Michigan State just recently asked, because what you see here is the jail population. And you can see that the the crime rate has gone down, but the incarceration rate has continued to stay high. And the answer to that question is complex. Why could that be? And at the end, we have a bibliography, and I have the reference to that task force, and it's really an interesting read. I know, maybe you don't think it might be, but I think it is an interesting read. They've done a lot of investigation. We'll touch on some of the issues that they found out, but one of the things, again, is the role of the prosecutor in this. Let's see what the role of the prosecutor. One thing we know that nationwide, there's 50% more prosecutors since 1990. So maybe the prosecutors need to be doing something. I don't know. Okay. Okay. Okay, Kathy's going to talk a little bit about the role. I think I'm just going to.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so the prosecutor is elected. Whoops, did I do that? I'm not sure. So each county elects a prosecutor every 4 years, and we have an election coming up this November, which many of you may know about. And so that's one of the reasons we are doing this, and also because we want to talk about how the prosecutor fits into the whole justice system and what is their role, if any, in the mass incarceration rates. Okay? So Washtenaw County has 1 full-time prosecutor and 26 assistant prosecutors. The prosecutor hires those assistants and sets the policies for the office. So lots of power there. And works independently from the sheriff's office, as well as independent from the county commissioners, even though the county commissioners provide the budget. So really, who oversees the prosecutor? Well, we do, and that's one of the reasons we are putting this forward. So what kind of power, right? Prosecutors exercise discretion at every stage of prosecution, and Carolyn's going to take us through every one of those stages. So how do we evaluate the performance of the prosecutor? Well, it'd be nice to have some data, but currently there isn't any data. At least that's what the prosecutor's office tells us. Okay? So there are 6 stages, and as I said, Carolyn's going to take us through these: charging, bail, diversion, discovery, pleas, and sentencing. At least this is how it currently stands.
So actually, in fairness, I want to say one thing that I didn't say about the Michigan incarceration population, that maybe a couple of years ago, and I don't have the dates, but at one point it was 45,000, 46,000, and it is down in Michigan to about 35,000 now. So that is encouraging to see. Okay, so charging. So, everybody knows what charging is after a person is arrested. But the prosecutor, the discretion here, this is an example of the discretion, can charge the person with a crime or let them go. Okay? I mean, this is not a judgment, this is just the facts, okay? Decides what crimes to charge the person with, and can recommend that juveniles be waived to adult, although now juveniles are 18 before they have to be seen in the juvenile court, but it can still be waived to go to the adult court. So the charge, second one decides what crimes to charge the person with. This is one of the problems in terms of what the power of the prosecutor. So it can be trespassing, larceny, breaking and entering, aggravated assault versus attempted murder. The prosecutor has this discretion to choose some of this. And in fact, many prosecutors will charge a person with multiple crimes, and that's to guarantee that the person's going to get one of those crimes. So, it might seem intelligent to do that, but it also it's an unfair system in that you're charging how many times you have to prove that you didn't punch the guy in the face or something. So they have a range of doing that, and it has a range of possible sentences with it. So that's, again, the discretion of the prosecutor to do this. Okay. Cash bail. Judges ordinarily set a bail amount at a suspect's first court appearance after an arrest, which may be either a bail hearing or an arraignment. Cash bail, as perhaps many of you have seen in the papers, there's been a lot of discussion about cash bail. It penalizes poor people. Because sitting in jail, everybody goes to jail first, even pre-trial sentencing, you're in jail. And sitting in jail is bad. You lose your job if you're there more than a few days, lose your house sometimes. Your children become disoriented and have problems because of it. So you can't make money. You very often can't find a lawyer once you're there. And this may make a person want to take a plea, which again, there's not all bad things about taking a plea, but you're sort of coerced into it, and many people agree to take a plea. There's lots of cases that have been discussed about particularly women, but men as well, taking a plea because who's watching their children while they're in the jail? So there's a lot of challenges about that. Coming into court from jail, this is an interesting, just the visual. A defendant doesn't look as clean kept if they were able to go home, and so they may be in prison in a jumpsuit or shackles, and this can prejudice to the judge when they appear in front of the judge. Okay, the next one, diversion. And yeah, we're only touching on some of the main things. I mean, we could be here forever talking about each one of these things, but so diversion is actually what we're about. Kathy will talk about the actual restorative justice process. But diversion is instead of sentencing, instead of being charged, instead of a lesser sentence, lots of ways you can do this. And so the prosecutor can recommend the person be diverted to a program that might be an alternative to incarceration. So that's at the discretion of the prosecutor. But of course, you have to have these programs in order for a prosecutor to be able to recommend them. So in Washtenaw County, again, this is just a quick summary, but we have drug treatment, mental health treatment in VA courts at the district court level. So, you know, you have the Supreme Court, and then you have your local appeals court, and then you have your regular judges. And we have a district court and a trial court. And at the district court level, we have these diversions. And so the prosecutor can put someone who has a drug problem and that may have caused a crime and decide that they'll let them go if they go into the drug treatment program. The question is whether or not they still have a record, and those are other issues that you'd want to look at, and those, again, at the discretion of the prosecutor. Then what we're looking at is for restorative justice to encourage our circuit court to get some of these diversion programs. Right now, they're only at the district court, which is traffic, some minor criminal things, and again, the mental health kinds of treatment. So we're looking to try to go to the trial court and more criminal, more serious crimes to see if we can find ways to mitigate those things. So, next one. So I think, were you going to talk about this? Okay. All right. So diversion, you know, why do we want diversion? Well, restorative justice is about healing. It's about healing for the victim. And again, we're not here to talk about the big picture of restorative justice, but one of the most important things that we know about crime in the United States is that the victim very often doesn't have a voice. The victim is not allowed to talk to the person who caused the harm very often and doesn't get a say, doesn't feel healed. I don't know how many of you saw the Redemptive Project. It was on TV. It was Van Jones. Well, it might be something you want to look at because he goes into the prison systems and has the offender and the victim meet and talk about the crime, and you can see what the victim talks about and how that feels. And anytime we've had any of these things, you can see that, well, I think Kathy's going to probably tell him too much here about the success of restorative justice. It provides a way to be accountable. So it's not letting the person who caused the harm just off. The person has to be accountable. And there's different ways that you can have people be accountable and different ways than spending time in prison, which doesn't really help anybody be accountable. And what restorative justice does, it reduces recidivism. There's lots of statistics to show that's happening. And by virtue of people not going back and people not being in prison, it reduces mass incarceration. And it helps the community. You know, we send our people out. If they come back and there's no healing, well, what are they going to do? If they can't get jobs, they can't get housing, what's going to happen there? So I think it's, so Kathy's going to just talk a little bit more about restorative justice.
So I wanted to bring your attention to, excuse me, these pamphlets that are in the back about restorative justice, if you have any questions about it. But what we have now is a retributive system, justice system. So a crime is committed not against a victim, but against the state. And so the state wants to know who did it, what law was broken, and how, excuse me, how can they be punished. So we're looking at a paradigm shift here, right? Something that's a little different. What harm has been done? How can it be repaired, and who's going to help repair it, right? So that's what we're looking for, is that kind of a system. And so this is considered a diversion to sentencing. We have, as Carolyn mentioned a little bit before, some bits of restorative justice in Washtenaw County. We have the Juvenile Drug Court. The schools, Skyline has a Sky Squad that handles interior fights and problems inside with restorative justice. And also the Dispute Resolution Center, which handles the mediation for the courts and peacemaking circles, and also just everyday harms that people make against one another. So I think that's...
Next one. Next one. So back to what the prosecutor is involved in, okay? So we talked about charging, cash bail, diversion, we're up to discovery. So discovery is sharing evidence. And so only evidence very often that the prosecutor considers favorable and significant to the defendant's case needs to be shared. Prosecutors have the police as a resource for investigating the crime. So I couldn't find the reference I had, but I think maybe it was when the Constitution was there. Maybe somebody knows the answer to this, where it says that the awareness that the prosecutor and the police have all the power, and so you want to have some balance of the scales to help the public defender or the defendant, and one of that is discovery. And so, but we hear very often that somehow not all the evidence is put forward from the prosecutor's office. Okay, then pleas. So 95% of cases are resolved via plea bargaining. And this is where the defendant pleads guilty to a lesser charge to avoid being tried in court. Remember, I told you that the prosecutor can say 3 different charges, and so then they're often threatened with, murder in the first degree. Well, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but, and really then the plea bargaining would be to do second-degree murder. If a defendant pleads, then there's no jury trial. So the prosecutor has discretion over what bargains to offer and what charges to threaten the defendant with. Now, the judge does have a say. Many of you heard maybe the recent case, the prosecutors with Trump and Stone. Yeah. So, of course, the judge does have a say in that. But the prosecutor very often recommends what this is. So, and the judge could say no to the plea deal, but very often they take whatever the prosecutor is offering. It is efficient to have pleas. If we had everything in trial, we know that we'd break the bank. That we couldn't do that. We couldn't possibly have all of them. But some people suggest that really there's enough money that we could get more people working. Some of the prosecutors are often afraid that there'd be fewer jobs. Well, maybe we shift some of the jobs and have more jobs in the court instead of in the prosecutor's office. I mean, that's just a bigger issue. But okay. So the plea carries with it recommended sentencing. If there is no plea, the original charges carry their own sentencing mandates or guidelines, and the prosecutor weighs in with his or her recommended sentencing. So also what happens with the plea, if later on you find out that that person was innocent, they've admitted guilt, and that stays on their record then, even if it's shown that there's no guilt there. That happened in Texas for sure a long time ago. So, okay, next one. Yeah, so other problems besides those things that the prosecutor is involved in with the current practices.
Okay, so bias is one of the issues that there has been a fair amount of research done that the current system disproportionately hurts poor people, the mentally ill, and minorities. The national incarceration rate for blacks is 5 times as high as that of whites, and in Michigan, it's 7 times as high. So this is something we want a prosecutor to be fair and to be unbiased. So if we have diversity in our prosecutor's office, that would get us at least somewhat in that direction. Okay. Some other issues are there's a financial incentive. If a prosecutor sends someone to prison, the state pays for it. If they keep them in jail or have a diversionary program, the county pays for it. So there's a real incentive to have people sent to jail. To prison, right? The other part of this process is that the victim is not taken into consideration. You could change the slide. So a victim is never asked, what they want from an offense that's happened to them. They're not given a chance to heal. In fact, they're not considered at all. And that's one of the reasons the restorative justice process is important to us, is because it does take the victim into account. And restorative justice does bring about healing both for the victim actually and for the offender and for the community. So this is another reason that we promote restorative justice. I just wanted to say that the prosecutor's office, I mentioned this before, does not keep statistics. At least that's what they've told us. So the Friends of Restorative Justice decided to get some data. So in 2016, we spent 6 months doing court watching in the juvenile court. We had forms, we took all that information and we pulled it together. And you can see that children are sometimes incarcerated. Children, meaning we're talking about under 18. Children often take a plea. There was a racial disparity, right? 70% of the youth in the court were black, and blacks only make up 12% of Washtenaw County. Another issue that we found is that there was a lot of resisting arrest felony charges given to youth. And if you think about young people whose brains are still developing and they're resisting an arrest, and you realize that when people go to prison one time, they're more likely to become part of that system again and again. Is that really something? Whoops, where do we go?
One more.
So anyway, the point is that really what we want to do with our children? Do we want to send them to prison, or do we want to have a different approach that would keep them from going to prison? So, right, now we have a little video we want to show you. Adam Foss, who was a prosecutor and is involved in restorative justice, and we'll get that any minute.
I feel
There we
a
go.
tremendous amount of responsibility to the people that I live around. It's just part of being a good community member, but also when you're a representative of the state, it's incumbent upon you to have that responsibility. The prosecutor holds all of the power in the criminal justice system. The definition of a prosecutor is the person who represents the state when someone else is accused of a crime. And our job is twofold. One is to seek accountability from that person, but also to make sure that justice is done. Of course, there's no definition that's ever given us about what justice is. It's just our own definition of justice. There are so many examples just in everyday criminal justice practice where prosecutors are wielding this great amount of power without any oversight, and that's really where the damage is done, and people just never get to see it. They don't understand it. America has developed this problem in mass incarceration. It's an epidemic, certainly the biggest civil rights crisis of our time because of who it affects: poor people, sick people, and particularly people of color. In the late 80s, early 90s, people started to fear kids that we defined as super predators. And so all of a sudden we started making all these laws that made it much more easy for kids to go to jail.
exactly classes tomorrow, so CJ major.
I was inspired to start working with young people in the justice system, and if you just took the opportunity to sit down with them and talk to them, you realize that they weren't criminals, they were just people that need a little bit of guidance, a little bit of direction. They don't need the criminal justice system. It's this line that we cross when we become professionals, where all of a sudden mistakes are no longer innocent because they're committed by people that don't look like us, that don't come from where we come from. Being raised by white conservative parents and living in a pretty white conservative neighborhood was difficult. While it was happening, it was informing me of things that I would do as a prosecutor later on in life without even knowing. And the perspective that I brought in was half my life being identified as a person of color, my other half of my life being the son of white Catholic parents. There are 2,300 prosecutors' offices around the country. 95% of the elected prosecutors in those offices are white. 86% of them are white men. So right there you have the opportunity for disconnect. I left my job at the DA's office, start an organization to train prosecutors and teach them what are alternatives to incarceration in your community. It's about taking the people that are in the system and equipping them with the tools and the information to help resolve problems and not layer problems on top of people. The power of opportunity as opposed to the wrath of the criminal justice system. We need thousands of prosecutors to recognize that. There is a movement towards demanding more of your elected prosecutors. A lot of people spend all of their time and their effort focusing on Trump and Clinton, but the impact that a district attorney makes, especially in communities like the one that we're in now, are affecting those people daily. In an ideal world, 10 years from now, the justice system would look something a lot more cooperative and solution-based and a lot less adversarial. The outcomes would be much greater than just doing the same thing that we've been doing for the last 350 years and coming up with the same result every single time.
The miracle to get it back from the film. Last time we struggled so much doing this, so I'd like to take you with me, okay, Shelley?
We'll talk.
Yeah. Okay, so now we want to show just some examples, and mostly nationwide, about slightly how we could change some of it if we had a different kind of culture. So a while ago, there were, it was probably 2 years ago or maybe 4 years ago, I don't know, but around the nation, there were different prosecutors were elected, and based on wanting to do it differently and having some things that were more humane, reducing mass incarceration, and restorative, in some says, is Adam Foss. By the way, Adam Foss was just here. It wasn't advertised very highly. It was a medical program that just started at the U of M to try to help young people of color to get into the medical field starting in high school, and the guy that was head of it at U of M happened to know Adam Foss and had him come and speak, and it was only by luck that I saw it. Otherwise, you would have all gotten notices about it. He's a wonderful speaker. He's really quite engaging. So if we go back to the things that the prosecutor is in charge of, we can see maybe just a few changes here, and I won't spend too much time on it. But so in Texas, you had 2 district attorneys, prosecutors in Texas stopped charging people with misdemeanors for possessing small amounts of marijuana. Now, some of these things like small things, but when we think of that crime rate that went up, a lot of that was due to drug arrests, and it could have been as small as people are in jail for 20 years for having marijuana. So this is really more significant than you might think. So in Harris County, which is in Houston, District Attorney Kim Ogg started sending people to drug education classes without arresting them or giving them a ticket. So not even giving them an arrest, actually putting them right into a drug program. She also ended jail time for small retail thefts, just said, no, we're not going to do that. And so some people, of course, can be critical of some of these things, what happens, but they don't just go home. Usually there are programs that they have to attend, and we'd like one of our programs to be one of those that people could come to. Okay, next one. Cash bail. Now, Kentucky, we're surprised to see Kentucky. In 1976, Kentucky banned for-profit bail. In 2011, Kentucky passed a law requiring judges to release pre-trial. So everybody who's pre-trial goes into a jail, whether you're a big-time, shooter or a little-time, shopkeeper, you're going to go to jail. And release them pre-trial, all individuals considered low and moderate risk for reoffending or flight. And we have a state legislator in, what's his name? In Grand Rapids. Ugh, I had it before I was going to. He's been fighting for to get rid of cash bail in Michigan. It'll come to us, okay? But he's great. He goes around the whole state trying to reduce cash bail. And the idea is to show there's lots of statistics to show that people don't run. You can assess whether they're at moderate risk for reoffending, and people aren't going to run off and leave their home and their families. And so that's easy. You can do that kind of a success. So then following this success, they used a risk threshold, and there are lots of states that are using some kind of assessment instead of charging bail. There's an assessment thing. New York just passed a no cash bail law. I could talk about that one for a long time because there has been some pushback. There was one case, it was sort of like the Willie Horton thing. Oh my God, this guy got loose. Well, actually, if you look at his case, he really wasn't such a risk factor, and he wasn't such a bad person either. The charge was a bit high, and you don't have to take my word for it. You can read it, and there's lots of articles both sides. So that's still in process. Yeah. David LeGrand. Thank you very much. Yeah, wonderful guy.
West side of the state.
Yeah, west side of the state. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Now we're into diversion, and actually, there's lots of programs around the United States that are working on diversion programs, and we're just actually researching some of them for a project that we can talk about in a moment. So in Washington, D.C., a 6-month diversion program, Alternatives to the Court Experience, serves teenagers who commit low-level offenses like vandalism and shoplifting. Program coordinators develop plans that can include therapy, tutoring, mentoring, and school support. I mean, why put young people in prison? What happens to them if they go to prison then? They're going to show up again. So why not do this? And in this one, the program's first 2 years of existence, more than 90% of the participants were not rearrested. Okay, so recidivism, very, very low for this. And I don't know how many programs we were looking at last night, at least 11. I mean, and there's many more than that that are working on trying to get diversion. A lot of them are for juveniles. That seems like a lower hanging fruit. I don't mean to be disrespectful to that, but some of us feel that really we need to be starting to look at the adult courts as well and doing a lot of this. So discovery. New York has passed a major overhaul of laws that dictate what evidence must be turned over to defendants facing criminal charges. One of the best things would be to have a rule that says you must hand over every bit of information, the sooner the better. A friend of mine has a son in jail in Florida, and not a nice crime, but there's some evidence that the prosecutor has from another case that's related to his that's 2 years old, and the attorney for my friend's son hasn't been able to get that. Just make them give it to you. So anyway, there's some laws that are changing, and Michigan has new civil and juvenile discovery rules to make discovery more timely for the defense. So that's the kind of thing you would need to have, earlier discovery rules. Next one, please. Yeah. So in 2016, Seattle prosecuting attorney Dan Satterberg introduced charging standards designed to ensure that the punishment for the offense is proportionate to the offense. So you can take in criminal history, for example, and have some kind of commensurate, sort of standardized, that we're not over here. You could be giving the same person. I mean, I'm sure you've read some things that say, why did that person get 20 years, this person gets 5 years, and don't like to say everything is based on the color of your skin, and that's not always the case, but there are times when the discretion seems really unwieldy. So anyway, the standards caution prosecutors against filing every case that can be filed and against overcharging to obtain a guilty plea. So that goes back to what we were talking about before. Okay. And also in pleas, the Restorative Justice is always touting Larry Krasner. He was one of the most innovative prosecutors in Philadelphia. And also he's received a lot of pushback for what he's doing. But so he instructed prosecutors' office to make plea offers below the bottom end of the Pennsylvania sentencing guidelines. So what he's trying to do is why the plea should give the person who caused the harm a little bit of not advantage. Did you have a word? Incentive. Yes, thank you. And so, good. And so, Larry Krasner is suggesting that we do that. I mean, what we say, supposedly we save costs and saves time. So, what's the incentive to take a plea? And Krasner also said when sentencing guidelines call for a sentence of 2 years or less, he's instructed prosecutors to seek probation. So not even any jail time, just have probation, or house arrest. You could do something like that. Okay, so alternative to sentencing and incarceration. This is from, again, a restorative justice perspective. Restorative justice programs, victim offender conferencing, that's a little bit more one-on-one, peacemaking circles, which we do have in Washtenaw County in the juvenile court. Tim Connors has led the nation on this kind of thing, and so we're those of us involved in Dispute Resolution Center trained in doing peacekeeping circles, and so we're doing that. At the trial courts, there is other diversion programs, and at the district courts, we're looking to include. Now, we do have some of the judges. We don't have time to talk about judges here, but there are a few judges in Washtenaw County who are willing to do a restorative justice practice, and that means Darlene O'Brien, who is one of the forward thinking on this, is willing to do adults and has had 1 or 2 cases where she's recommended restorative justice practice on this. So, next one, Kathy's just going to talk about Daniel Sered, which is a stellar program. So, we're not going to get there yet, but.
So this is a gold standard program. It's a common justice program in New York City, and it's led by Daniel Sered, who actually was here several years ago, and it's a tremendously strong program that actually deals with violent felonies. So the structure is there's sort of 4 steps. The victims and offenders, victims and defendants must agree to meet. A facilitator helps the parties to address the impact of the crime, what are the needs of the victim, and the party who has caused the harm takes responsibility and helps to decide how that is going to be ameliorated. Also, the responsible parties complete a violence intervention program. It generally lasts 12 to 15 months, and those who complete the program successfully do not serve a sentence or go to jail. And the recidivism rate is very low for this program. So all in all, it's something that we would like to do. So, Carolyn, I think you're doing next.
Kathy's going to read the quote. So what do we want? Okay, what do we want? So Kathy's just going to read a quote from a woman who just wrote a book advising us about the power of the prosecutor.
Please use the microphone.
Yeah, sorry.
Right, so this is from the book Charged by Emily Brazelton. And she says, prosecutors also hold the key to change. They can protect against convicting the innocent. They can guard against racial bias. They can curtail mass incarceration.
So, next slide. Yeah. So first, we'd like to give you a little chance. We have a little activity that we're going to have you do in a few minutes, and that's, what kind of questions would you want to ask those running for prosecutor? You can't ask this man today, but but he'll get a heads up then on the kinds of questions we might ask. Just 1 second, okay? But first, a lot to take in. What we'd like to have first, I mean, we'll give you some time to ask some questions too, but have any of you had any experience with prosecutors, either way? And, what's your feeling about the prosecutor's office in general? Yeah.
I was accompanying a friend to court, and I was sitting there, and they brought out, the officers brought out a young woman in an orange jumpsuit, and handcuffs and so forth. And it turned out that what she had done was she wrote a check that wasn't covered by her checking account. She had 3 children. And at Walmart, she wrote a check for $84. The prosecutor asked for much more than this, but the judge gave her 4 months in jail. She had 3 little children.
Can you summarize that?
Oh, okay. So this was an experience. Nan went to the court with somebody, and
Here in Washtenaw.
Washtenaw County, the woman was had written a check for $84 that was not covered in her account to Walmart. Yeah, and the prosecutor ended up wanted to sentence her to more, but the judge gave her 4 months in jail. Yeah. 3 children, yeah. Boy, that seems awfully harsh, even by our standards, but,
Now,
yeah.
of course, when it's a sentencing, it's my understanding, and I did ask a few questions.
Yeah,
It's my understanding that they're not going to be talking about if they've reduced her charges down to a single one. Had she done other things? Does she
Yeah.
have a history?
yeah,
I don't know any of that.
yeah.
But on the face of it, it
Mhm.
seems that there ought to be
Right,
many alternatives to
Right.
sending a young mother to jail
right.
for those 3
Yeah.
children.
Yeah, that's a pretty, yeah.
I couldn't even start to hear what you said, so if you can repeat it back, that would be really helpful. And I'm also wondering about the audio, because people don't have microphones, so.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Come on. Could you come up, maybe Nan, could you come up and, could you come up and repeat? Yeah, just repeat.
just repeat what happened, yeah.
I accompanied a friend to Washtenaw County Circuit Court.
In the mic more.
It's so loud in my ears. Okay, is this okay?
Yes.
All right, this is about 2 years ago, maybe just 1 year ago, actually. I accompanied a friend to Washtenaw County Circuit Court and sat through a number of cases. It was a sentencing day, apparently. That's what happens on that day. And a young woman was brought in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. She looked to be in her 20s. And she had apparently written a check, overdrawn a check, I would call it. Apparently it's called something else, kiting or something. And for $84, she wrote a check to Walmart. And the prosecutor wanted her to have a much longer term, but the judge sentenced her to 4 months in jail. She had 3 little children, and she overdraft. This was an overdraft. Now, I don't know if she was a mass killer previously in her life, but this was so shocking to me. So that's the story.
Thanks. Yeah, and there's a lot we don't know sometimes, but that's one of the points that, a number of us were working with the prosecutor for the past couple of years and trying to get some of this information. The court watching was very helpful because people who went into the courts were asking some of the questions to find out what happens. I just might add that the people I did once, I went to the court watching there, and it was very upsetting to see the juveniles come in. And again, their crimes are minimal mostly. I mean, we would consider them minimal. And they're shackled, and these are kids, and that to me right away seemed like something, do we need to do this, and how does that make them feel? And again, if we're trying to talk about healing and trying to get them to come back to our society feeling better about themselves, that doesn't seem to be an appropriate response. So anyone else like to share something that they know or feel about the prosecutor's office?
Everybody may not know that the League of Women Voters, you know this part, the League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. We don't support specific candidates. We don't support specific political parties. We do have stands that we take on particular issues. So my question is, does the State League or the National League have a position on this particular issue? Because that's what we're talking about. We're not going to bring in politics. It's very tempting in this day and age, but we are keeping this as nonpartisan as we can. That's our goal. Okay?
So nice of you to ask. The League of Women Voters does have a position on prisons, and one of the categories, it doesn't say anything about prosecutors, like let's change the culture of the prosecutor, but it has a statement that one of the three, finding the words, but restorative justice is an appropriate response to crime. So it does advocate for therapeutic, which would be called the diversion courts, mental illness, and restorative justice. It does keep in that we should punish people too, which I think maybe we could change that someday. I mean, we don't have to advocate, I think, for the punishment. It's sort of the underlying premise there, something that we want to try to change. But anyway, so there is a policy that's, yeah. Yep.
Has the current prosecutor been resistant to diversionary methods?
Yes, is the current prosecutor resistant to diversionary?
I don't have any experience with this.
Yeah. So the answer is yes.
But if you ask him.
No, even he would admit it, except he says, we could let kindergartners. One time he talked about we could let kindergartners have some interactions and circle keeping. But he really he uses the, and he's not here, so it's just my words of what we had him, he came to Restorative Justice and we asked him about these things. He was adverse, he's a very victim, at least he claims he's very victim supportive, which who here isn't victim supportive? You want to make sure the victim's rights are heard. Our contention is that the victim's rights would be better heard in a restorative practice. He feels violent crimes can't be dealt with in this way. We've already seen a wonderful program where that's the case. A woman who just won the MacArthur Award works in California with a similar program. She herself was a abused child, sexually abused and physically abused and verbally abused. And so she's started a program in, I think it's Oakland, for both that. So yes, he's opposed to it. Now, he has changed a little bit recently, and I'd like to think it's because of some of the work that we've done. He allowed us to go into the juvenile court. We have a program that we not gotten off to a good start yet, but he allowed us to go into juvenile court for delinquents. There is already the peacekeeping in the juvenile court that, what is, Connors, the family court. Yeah, so we have peacekeeping in the family court. Peacekeeping is a larger group of people that are working with the community that includes the child in this case. And some of us are trained in that. That takes a long time. Some of us want a little victim offender conferencing is one-on-one with the victim and maybe a few other people. That wouldn't be as long as that. So he's changed a little bit, but he was really very resistant to it. And I think as he's leaving, he's, maybe speaking a little bit more. Although, I don't know, we haven't heard him speak, so. Yeah.
Just a question. Is diversion less costly than prison?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Is diversion less than prison? Yes. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And that's one of the things that Restorative Justice, we are actually working with the county commissioners, and I'll actually be able to answer that question a little bit better in a couple of months, because we're actually looking at the different diversion programs. But the answer is categorically yes, in the sense of no recidivism means they don't go back to prison. And we want a community of people who, when they come out, they're ready to contribute to our community. That's the best way we can save money, is having people contribute in our community and not have fear about them. I think there's so much fear that's perpetuated and the diversion does help that kind of thing. Yeah. Good question, and it's not always so clear. Kathy Gorley knows better some of the answers to that one. Yeah.
How many people in jail right now have severe mental illness or other disabilities?
Yeah, how many people in jail have severe mental illness? And I'm sorry I don't have the statistics on that, but it's high. Yeah. Well, I think it's more than that. Hugo? Yeah.
Well, I was at a program with Mr. Kaminsky from
Okay.
the Department of
Yeah.
Correction, and he said 25%, a good 25%, if not more, have mental health
In
problems.
prison.
In prison?
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, we were at this, I was there too. Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. That's a good number. 25% in the prison. In the jail, I think there's more. 45. Yeah. Yeah. So there is an interesting program in Seattle also. It's called the LEAD program. Can never remember what it stands for, but what that is doing, and our sheriff and some of his assistants went for training in Seattle. The LEAD program, literally, when someone gets stopped and it's, whatever the case is, unless it's a very serious crime, and the person looks like there's something to do with mental illness, the police, the sheriff's office has been trained to see a little bit more of that now and be able to recognize that. So the paper that gets, charged gets put in a hopper, and that person goes to a program, either, mental health facility or restorative justice pro, something. If they complete that, this gets literally thrown away, and that person then has no record. So our sheriff is trying to do some of these things. Again, I'm always, they're always falling a little short in my eyes because I want it to be more than just mental health. I agree it should be mental health, but there are other people in there for other reasons that could be dealt with the same way, such as this woman. I don't know if she has mental health issues, but yeah. Okay, maybe one more question. If there's another question, then we want to do a little activity with you. Yeah, Kathy?
Can a prosecutor continue to charge a person if the victim doesn't want that?
Yes. Oh, so can a prosecutor continue to charge a victim, charge the person who caused the harm, even if the victim doesn't want it? And the answer is yes. Now, there may be some, codicils to that, but there have been stories of victims who pull back and say, I want to change my mind about that, but it's too late. And that's the kind of thing maybe that should really change. I don't know what that would cost or how you would change that, but the victim should be heard. And it can have an effect in some cases, with Darlene O'Brien, for example, that might have an effect. Now, in the federal, at least this was about a year ago, we know federal judge Judy Levy, she said that federal law doesn't ever allow the victim to see the person who caused the harm, or the person who caused the harm is not allowed to ever see the victim anyway. They're not allowed to have any relationship. Now, I heard that, but then Van Jones's program was in the federal prison, I believe, and they were able to see each other. So, I don't know, you can get around some of that kind of thing, but yeah.
So one other thing I'd just like to say is that in Canada, who they have been doing restorative justice much longer than we have, to a much higher degree, all crimes go to victim offender conferencing. Well, I shouldn't say all crimes, I don't exactly know, but a preponderance of crimes go to victim offender conferencing first. And that's on a national level in Canada. So do you want me to hand out this?
Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, the league has forums when it's election time, and one of the forums that the league will have, and there have been actually quite a few, is for the prosecutor's office. And so one of the biggest things you can do is vote. Am I allowed to say who's running? No.
Let's not.
Well, that's education. I mean,
Okay, who's running? If you say everybody who's running.
Okay. Ellie Savitt's running, Ariana Slay is running, and Hugo Black is running. Max, sorry. I'm so sorry. I apologize. So there's 3 prosecutors running. You can vote. And one of the ways you find out about the prosecutor's office is by going to the forums. I thought Donna Crutter was going to be here today. She runs the forums. We've already met with the state bar and the Washtenaw County bar, rather, and we're organizing. I don't know if we have a definitive date for that.
24th of June.
24th of June is going to be the debate for the prosecutors for the league. Yes, Meryl.
More people enter the race now, or is it too late?
There's a cutoff, I'm sorry, I think April or so is a deadline.
Yeah, April.
So more people could
Yeah.
get into the race.
Yeah. You need a lot of signatures, though. I mean, it's going to, yeah. You want to run?
When you're ready to do the conversation, I want to.
So we will first
Yeah.
vote on this
Yeah.
office in August, that'll be a
Oh.
runoff, correct?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Primary. The primary in August. I believe, I could be.
It's August.
It's the primaries in August, and because there are already 3 candidates filed, there will be a runoff.
Really?
No, is that?
I don't think so.
No, it's 3, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Okay.
3 Democrats.
Right, yeah. If they're,
There is no
Oh, right,
Republican yet.
right, it's not a runoff, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the judges. So the county prosecutor's race is a partisan race, so there are 3 Democratic
Right,
candidates on the
right,
ballot
right,
in August.
right.
So you need to
Yeah.
have people show up and vote in August.
Yeah, so August is a primary, but so far, at least that I know, there's only Democrats running. So 3 Democrats will be running. That's the time to vote in August. So get your ballot and vote for. So what we'd like you to do today is, I don't know, Kathy gave out the handouts? Yeah. So on one side is a bibliography, just if you want some